Hi, and welcome to a new tutorial on the Roguelike Deckbuilder toolkit. In this video I'm going to cover effect actions, which is what happens or what is displayed to the player when a card effect happens. So for instance, when you play the block card, then 7 armor is added to your hero. That's the gameplay effect, right? But you also have the hero play an animation. So if we do that, he does this block animation, and this is handled by the effect action. To give another example, in Chant of Ruin, you have both that and you also have a particle effect played. So when I play that, then you get this explosion particle effect as well, and that is also handled by the effect action. So those are things that are easy to set up with the defaults, but I've also made it so that it's very easy to override the effect action so that you can make it do kind of whatever you want to do. Like whatever happens between the effect triggering, right, and then seeing the results of that effect, you can modify quite easily. So for this tutorial, we're going to create a particle projectile effect for your smite attack. So I've already implemented it here. So if we attack, we see that we fire this ice projectile, which explodes on our enemy. So this is something I'm going to show to give you an idea of ways you might create your own effect actions to make how your cards look when played be completely unique for your games or between your various cards. So without further ado, let's get started on that. Right, so here we are in the arena map in Roguelike Deckbuilder. For this projectile, we're going to need some assets, though you can of course substitute with just using basic shapes. But the ones I used are, well, the same that I used in my dungeon crawler toolkit. So I just like migrated the particles from the dungeon crawler toolkit, which are the ones that I use like for one of the spells here. So I'm taking the same as I'm using like for this frostbolt projectile, not the firebolt projectile you see there, but I'm using this one, and that is the one that you can find in the Infinity Blade effects, which is free on the marketplace and made by Epic. So those are like the old Cascade particle system and not Niagara. So it's the old way of doing particles, but you know, this is just for demonstration purposes, and they look good enough, I think. So those are the ones I will be using, but you can use whatever you would prefer. Right, so with whatever you want to display this stuff imported in, then we can go to, I'll just make a tutorial folder temporarily for making our projectile. So tutorial, and we'll make a projectile blueprint. It's going to be a very simple one. We'll just base it off on actor and I'll call it be projectile. And we will make use of this in our effect action. So I'll get back to exactly what an effect action is, but let's just start with a projectile. That's simple enough to set up. So all I want here really is an actor which can display the particle, the projectile particle. I want it to be able to move to a location, and I want it to destroy itself and explode when it reaches that location. So to do this in a simple way, let's just, we're gonna spawn this. So when it is spawned, we're just gonna run, then begin play runs automatically, right? We're gonna need an emitter for this. Or wait, it's particle, is that the... Yeah, so Cascade particle, we're using the, do we call it legacy at this point maybe? And this is the ice projectile, so if I compile this, yeah, we can see that in the viewport. So now it looks like a nice ice projectile. So next we want to have the ability to set the target location, so we can just add that as a variable, target location, and we'll make that a vector. And we want to have this then exposed on spawn, and for exposed on spawn I believe you also need to set it to be instance editable, so that when we spawn this projectile we can set the value of this target location in the kind of spawning node. So nice, we have that one. Now we want to move this projectile from its start location to its end location. We can do that in many different ways. I'm just going to use a timeline. for that, and we'll just call this timeline lerp, because I'm just gonna interpolate the location. Basically, that's all I'm going to use this timeline for. We're going to make a super simple timeline just with a length of 1 second. I'm going to make a float track, and I'm going to call this the alpha, because we're going to use that for the alpha of our lerp. So for those who don't know, like when you're lerping, then you're lerping generally between 0, which is the start of the interpolation, to 1, which is the end of the interpolation. And we're going to have our start location of our projectile be at alpha 0, and the target location at alpha 1. But for this track here, we can just make the simplest possible thing. Might even be overkill to use a timeline for this, to be honest, but it's quick enough to set up. So we just have 1 second where we're going linearly from 0 to 1. So then we have the alpha here we can use, and we want to then set the location. We could set active location and rotation, but we're going to have a constant rotation here. We're going to be pointing towards our target the entire time, so we can just set that at the start. We don't need to do that every tick. So we just set the actor location, we lerp, linearly interpolate, and we want to end up at the target location. We want that to be based on the alpha. Now, what do you think we might want to do is to just get the actor location here, but the problem here is of course that the actor location changes as this lerp is happening. So we're going to end up with kind of this weird exponential kind of thing. So we want to kind of cache this at the beginning instead. So we'll set the start location to be the location this actor is at when it's spawned, and we'll lerp between these. Now, since this is instance editable, the target location, we can place this in our level and check out if it works already. Oh, I put this at finished. That's not correct. There. So let's go here, place our projectile, and so I want its target location to be something. Let's set its target location to be the location like of our track here. I'm just going to copy this over to the target location, and then this starts at 100, so I'm going to end it at a Z of 100, and if we hit play, yeah, then we see this projectile flying, which is of course not how we want to have it working with our effect, but just for testing. And then when it reaches the end location, we want it to explode. So we will spawn an emitter at the location of this projectile actor. I will choose the ice explosion that I imported, and after that I want to destroy the actor. So if we check it out now, and it explodes and it's gone. So this is all we really need for this projectile, I believe. Well, I'll see if I'm going to revisit it when we do the effect action. Right, okay, so now for effect actions. So what are they? Where are they? If we check our data, our card data, if for instance we check our smite here, you see that in the card effects for smite we have an effect action set up. So this will be the action, which is an action just like all the other card actions you have here, which are used for all sorts of stuff, for like queuing anything, using the action manager to display stuff in game. Like see my action manager tutorial for that. Let's see. So this action is then responsible for displaying what happens with this effect. And it also has this option of adding like a particle. So the only Niagara system that I have for this, it has to be Niagara system, because this is using Niagara. We just imported Cascades stuff here because I used that since I had that. But you want to use Niagara systems if you're using like the basic setup here. But if I change this now so that this action effect has access to this explosion Niagara system, then when we now play, our smites should have become explosive. And they have. So that's like, without doing any changes to the action effects themselves, this is what you can do. And you can also change like the animation that is played. So we can change this like to a block animation. So now when we use the smite card, he plays the block animation and then the enemy takes damage, right? So these are the things that the effect action lets you change by default. I'm just going to change that back to attack. And we can see how that works. So if we find it, here it is, it's BP action effect. So this is all it does. So when this action is played, then it checks, okay, is there any hero animation referenced here? If there is one, and the puppet, like the puppet of the minion that owns this card effect, is it valid? Then it runs this animation on that puppet, and then the puppet is responsible for doing whatever it wants to do to animate that stuff, and then it waits for the puppets to signal that it is done with the animation, right? So it then binds to an event and checks, okay, and waits for the puppet to call that event, and then it continues. And at that point, it spawns particles, which is this part. So it checks, okay, is the target valid? Is the effect like oh no, that's not the one. The particle of the effect. So this one, is that valid? If so, then we also want to kind of spawn that particle system, which would be that explosion. So these are like the steps of how the effect action uses the data to show the stuff that I did earlier. But we can't just change stuff in the data here to have this work as a projectile that lerps to the target. Well, we could do that if we like do that within the puppet or something like that, but that would be a weird way to do this particular thing, I think. So for this, we want to make a new effect action. This is done quite simply by taking our BP action effect and creating a child actor of it. So we can call this then particle. I should maybe do a short digression first just to show where this stuff actually gets called. If we go to core and BP card, we can see that within this event graph, which is using the card, fairly late in the process here, then we queue this card effect action. So for each card effect that gets resolved, just before it gets resolved, the action associated with that effect gets spawned, right? This function here assumes that it is of the class the BP action effect class. So that's why you want to create child actors of the effect action in order to create different kinds of effect actions. But this is where it's queued if you are curious. So now to modifying the action itself. So we created a new action effect. This is not the one. Let's find it. This one, the particle. Whoops. And let's see. So what we want to do here is to override a function that we have on BP action effect. We want to override the generally maybe play action, but sometimes spawn effect particles. So for this particular effect, I actually don't want to override this stuff here because I still want to have the puppet display the attack animation first. And then when that attack animation hits, that's the point at which I want to spawn our projectile. So for this particular effect action, I want to override spawn effect particles. That would make the most sense. So I'm going to let this be the same way it is. And then in our new particle action, I want to then override, did I forget it already? Spawn effect particles. So instead of doing the stuff I usually do there, we will spawn an actor from the class. We'll find our particle. That's the one, what do we call it? Projectile, that's one, of course. That makes more sense. We'll spawn our projectile. We have our target location available here because we set it to be exposed on spawn. We want the target location to be the location of the target. I believe this might be at the feet of the target, so we want to change that, but let's just start with that. And for the transform, I want to be able to control the rotation of this thing. So let's just get the location of our source puppet. So the one that is actually doing this, that's responsible for this effect. And for the rotation, we can get, you know, the look at rotation between these two. So the rotation for when this location looks at this location, which would make sense here, I guess, for the rotation. And then we want to wait for this projectile to hit before we continue. And this is something we could normally do with, you know, we could do this with an event dispatcher, right? We can do on projectile hit, right? And we could call this this one here, and then within our effect particle we could then bind to on projectile hit, and then we could continue from there. But since we are destroying this projectile, then we can actually use one of the built-in event dispatchers that Unreal Engine has, which is any actor will call the onDestroyed event dispatcher when it is destroyed. So we can just bind to that instead in this particular instance. So I think it's onDestroyed, yeah, bind event to onDestroyed. So when this projectile is destroyed, which we do automatically when it reaches its end, then we will have a custom event. So we can have proceed on hit, suitably vague, and then I want to call the basic effect stuff that we have here, right? So I'm just gonna add a call to the parent function, which, you know, will call all of the stuff that is in the parent here, so all of this stuff here, and we'll do that when our projectile hits. So that should be enough, I think. We'll just take that we always spawn this one, just in case there are any issues there. Probably won't be, but better safe than sorry. Then in Smite, let's change our effect class, not the effect class, I mean the effect action, to this particle instead. And now it's going to be interesting. So when we use our Smite, yeah, we shoot a projectile at the floor as I suspected, and it explodes when we hit, and then it does its damage. So that is working. And now first let's change within our the action effect particle here so that we actually hit at the center of our minions here. So I think I have made relative center. So you can actually get that for the puppet, so you can adjust like within each puppet what is considered the center of that the center location of that puppet relative to the root of that puppet. So therefore I can use this and I can add these together. We could just have, you know, simply added like 100 units or something, and it would be fine here probably too. But in this way you can adjust this for each puppet. So if you have some, you know, really tall minions that the player can have, then you can have that spawn at a higher point. I mean, honestly, it might make even more sense here to, within the source puppet, to have like a socket on the hand of the skeletal mesh of the puppet, and then you spawn the projectile there or something, and you can like get that from the puppet. But I won't get into that in this tutorial. Hopefully you can figure that stuff out. If not, ask me in the Discord about that if you want to achieve that particular result. But let's just do it more simply here, and we're just getting the relative centers. Let's hope this works. And we'll see if I hit an attack now. Yeah, then it goes from the center of this puppet, which is something that is defined. I can show that too. Within, the puppets. Where are my puppets? There they are. So in our skeletal puppet, is this overridden? Let's see, relative center is 0. Oh, that's because it's not overridden. So in skeletal puppet, relative center is, the skeletal mesh, and I'm getting the extent of the skeletal mesh, and I'm just dividing it up here. That's how I'm doing it by default. But you can override, of course, this thing in your particular puppet if you would prefer. Okay, enough digressions for now. So we have this adjustment here, and that works well. Though I realized that for this particular projectile thing here, we might be doing something unnecessary. But actually not, because we don't have a Niagara particle, but I can still, show this, because we're spawning this emitter, right? And we might not need to, because we can just spawn an emitter through the data, right? The only one we have access to here is the Niagara explosion, but now currently we are not spawning an emitter, we're just destroying it, and then we're letting the effect action take care of spawning the emitter, and now we should have a frost bolt with a fiery explosion. And why is it starting? Oh yeah, that's because when I went to our skeletal puppet or the sword puppet, I checked the get puppet relative center, and I didn't override just by double clicking onto it, and now the relative center of our sword puppet is 0, so I have to delete this again, so it uses the default, which is within the parent puppet. So I'm going on a lot of digressions here, but I think this might be useful as a general kind of how does inheritance and interfaces or whatever work in Unreal Engine. So I'll keep it in, and now it should be working as normal again. Excellent. So I think that covers most of the important stuff, really. But yeah, let's just delete this projectile here. We don't need that. And maybe I'll just quickly throw together one like hacky and weird different kind of setup. Just give you another different idea of what we can do. So for this, maybe we'll do the custom stuff we will do within the puppet instead. Let's do that. So if we go to our skeletal puppet, our sword puppet, we have to actually check the skeletal puppet to see how this works. So when we are animating this puppet, this is what is done by the action effect. The first thing we do here is that we're telling this action is telling our puppet to animate itself, and then it waits for that animation to say that it has hit. So we can override this stuff, or we can change how this stuff works within the puppet. So for the skeletal puppet, you will see that it takes this animation and it passes it further through another interface function to the animation blueprint of the skeletal mesh, which is, now I'm going into a lot of blueprints here. So it goes into ABP Warrior, right? And what it does here is to play a montage based on this this variable that holds the various kinds of let's see, where's the event graph? This is the event graph. Hold on, yeah, there it is. So we can choose the various kinds of montages that we play based on what tag is being passed in here, right? And then within each of these animations, I mean, I've covered this stuff in the puppet tutorial, so I won't have to talk more about that, but just to remind you, and then when this animation sends notify, then it sends this back to the puppet to signal an animation event, and the puppet then when it receives this from the animation blueprint, then it calls this event dispatcher on the Puppet component, actually, which says that this animation has ended or an animation event has happened. And this is what this action is waiting for. So we can, override this stuff in our sword puppet, say. So if we override animate puppet, so we can say that we want to do a switch here on this tag. And if we do the anim tag, let's call it cast. And then if we don't use cast, then we want to call our parent, like call a parent. This, then we can just do the stuff that we normally do. But if we get the cast tag, then we'll do something crazy instead, and let's think about what that could be. Let's just twirl around the skeletal mesh of this guy, or like the rotation. Let's add another timeline. So I mean, I've already covered the effect action stuff, so if you feel I'm just rambling now, then feel free to quit here, but let's see what we can do. I'm just doing this off the cuff. So we'll do a twirl timeline, and we'll have him, also we'll do the similar kind of thing. I'll twirl and I'll do an alpha, and I'll do this during 1 second, and we'll start at 0 again, and we'll end up at like 360 degrees. Let's just do 3 point like this. Oh, and that rounded automatically. Yeah, maybe that's fine anyway. We'll see soon enough. So we'll do a 360 degree rotation over 1 second, using this to set actor location. No, rotation, I mean. During the update, we will like lerp the pitch, I guess. And we'll use our twirl alpha here, and we will go. No, we don't actually have to use the lerp for this, because we're going to 360 just within the timeline. So I'll just plug this directly into the pitch. I'll get the existing rotation just to make sure that we're not overriding this stuff. So we're twirling around, and then when we're done with this spinning move, which is a neat trick, then we will call an animation event, right? So on our puppet component, with ourself as the puppet, and we will then say that, hey, this is an event associated with our cast animation, because that is what we are calling here. So now we have this twirly thing going on. We don't need to do a new effect action for this. Actually, I realized this is something we can just override. So now in our card here, when we're doing our attack, then if I switch this to the cast tag, now we're very curious about what is going to happen. Then let's see. Oh, whoops. Yeah, wonderful. So that's exactly what I was going for. But yeah, I mean, that didn't work how I expected it to exactly. But you can see my point, right? You can modify how these effects happen within effect actions, or you can do that within the puppet, or you can do that within the animation blueprint. You can do this as all of these various kinds of stages. So you can create an effect action where you tell your puppet jump over in front of the other one, and then do its attack action and jump back in kind of a JRPG style or whatever. So the world's your oyster, really. So I hope that you can see that this system is quite flexible, and I hope you have fun playing around with it. And if you struggle with seeing how you could implement some sort of effect action like this in your own game in the exact way that you want, then feel free to visit the Discord and just ask me there, and I'll do my best to help you out. Also, might be a good time to mention that it is possible to review assets on the marketplace. So you can do that, so that is appreciated. That is not at all expected by me or anything like that, and absolutely no hard feelings to anyone who doesn't review, but just, you know, a reminder that it's possible to review products. Anyway, so that's that tutorial. I think I've covered everything that I should, and probably a bit more than that. So hope it was useful. Head over to the Discord if you want to chat, and if not, then I'll see you in the next tutorial.